You have been a quiet, invisible wife for 7 years, Evelyn. That is all you have ever been. It is time I stood beside someone who actually belongs in the room." Those were the words Tobias Renfield, the 41-year-old Dean of Academic Affairs at the Renfield Academy of Arts and Letters, spoke while standing beneath her father's portrait in the institution's oldest lecture hall. He had waited until the last of the memorial guests had shuffled toward the reception before he said them, as if the timing were a mercy. He held a cream-colored envelope in one hand. Dana Veach, the 30-year-old director of development and Tobias's companion since the previous autumn, stood behind him with her coat folded over her arm and her chin lifted just slightly, the way someone lifts their chin when they believe they have already won. Aveline Moss Renfield, 36-year-old wife of Tobias, and the person no one in that hall understood to be anything more than the quiet daughter of a generous benefactor, was still wearing her father's old watch on her left wrist. She had worn it every day for the 11 months since he died. She stood between the podium and the portrait, and she looked at the envelope in her husband's hand, and she did not move. "You chose today," she said. Tobias's expression did not shift toward guilt. It shifted toward impatience, as though her grief were a scheduling conflict. He set the envelope on the podium, on the same surface where, 1 hour earlier, scholars had read tributes to her father, and he said Dana understood ambition in a way Aveline never had. He said their marriage had been a holding pattern. He said a man in his position needed a partner who could elevate him. Not one who spent her days in archive rooms and foundation board meetings no one cared about. He walked out with Dana beside him. The echo of their footsteps crossed the hall her father had built. Loa Kessler, 34-year-old closest friend of Aveline since their graduate school years, stood frozen near the side door, with her hand pressed flat against the wall. She had come to the memorial to support Aveline through a hard afternoon. She had not expected to witness this. Aveline did not chase him. She did not call his name. She looked at the bronze portrait of Aldrich Moss, 71 at the time of his death, founder of Renfield Academy and one of the quietly largest forces in independent arts education in the American Northeast, and she breathed slowly until her hands stopped shaking. Then she picked up the envelope, slid it into her bag, and walked out into the cold. What Tobias Renfield had never understood, had never, in 7 years of marriage, cared enough to learn, was that the academy his name had been attached to was not named after him. It had been named after Aveline's family. Her grandfather had purchased the original property in 1961. Her parents had converted it from a private estate into something that mattered. Her mother, who had died 4 years before Aldrich and without any ceremony, had designed the first curriculum. Her father had spent 30 years building it into an institution that trained composers, playwrights, designers, and choreographers who went on to stages and studios that did not forget where they had come from. Aveline had grown up inside those walls. She had fallen asleep on chairs in the editing rooms. She had done her homework in the library before it had proper lighting. She had learned to read financial ledgers beside her father before she had learned to drive. The Moss Renfield Education Trust, which controlled a majority stake in the academy through a private holding structure, had passed to Aveline 2 years before Aldrich's death, when his declining health made him cautious. The public-facing documents listed the trust as the controlling entity. Aveline's name appeared only in the sealed beneficiary records. To anyone outside a small circle of attorneys, senior board members, and financial officers, she was simply a former academic consultant and the founder's daughter, a woman who attended board meetings because sentiment, not authority, gave her a seat. Her access badge read Foundation Liaison. Tobias had been hired 6 years ago. He had been impressive in his interview, compelling in his research record, and charming in the social circles that fed the institution's reputation. He had courted Aveline inside these hallways. He had asked her father's blessing at a dinner table in the academy's guest house. He had told her once, in the early years, that he was grateful to be part of something her family had built. By the 4th year of their marriage, he had stopped saying grateful. By the 6th, he had started referring to the academy in conversation as his institution. He had never asked what the trust held. He had assumed it held memories. Weston Gall, 63-year-old family attorney and executive trustee of the Moss Renfield Education Trust, arrived at Aveline's apartment on the evening of the memorial without being called. He brought the sealed transfer documents her father had signed before the end, and a look that said he had been waiting for this conversation longer than Aveline had. "He cannot touch the trust," Weston said before she asked. "Not through divorce, not through the marital agreement he signed before the wedding. He had independent counsel available. He chose not to use it." Aveline sat at the kitchen table with her father's watch, unclasped in her palm. The weight of it felt different outside her wrist. "Can he be removed from the academy?" she asked. Weston's voice became careful. "If there is documented misconduct connected to his role, yes. The trust holds authority to initiate formal review. The board's ethics committee has the process." Aveline set the watch flat on the table and looked at it for a long moment. "Then let us find out what is there," she said. Fern Colwick, 54-year-old chief financial officer of the Renfield Academy, and a woman who had served the Moss family since Aveline was 19, met her the following morning in the lower administrative offices before the staff arrived. Fern was not a warm woman by nature, but her loyalty ran to the bone, and her patience for dishonesty was exactly zero. She had a stack of flagged expense reports on the table before Aveline had removed her coat. "I have been watching this for 6 months, Fern said, placing one hand on the stack. "I did not bring it to you while your father was declining. I did not want to add to what you were already carrying." Aveline looked at the first flagged entry, a hotel suite billed to the Dean's Discretionary Fund. Category: Faculty Recruitment and Development. The dates matched a conference Tobias had said he attended for research purposes. A single supplementary name on the room reservation: Vitch. The second report: Event catering charged to departmental outreach. The event had no attendance log, no summary document, no follow-up correspondence, only a receipt from a private dining establishment with a reservation under 2 names. The third: A consulting contract paid to a company called Veach Creative Solutions for something labeled Donor Engagement Strategy. Aveline had never seen a strategy document produced under that name. The company had no public presence. The payments had been processed through a sub-account in the development office, Dana's office. Fern walked Aveline through each entry in the flat voice of a woman working very hard not to let fury interrupt usefulness. "There is more," Fern said when she reached the bottom of the first stack. "But I needed you to see the shape of it first." The shape of it was clear. The money that had made space for Dana in Tobias's life had come, in part, from the institution Aveline's family had spent 60 years protecting. Greer Payne, 42-year-old head of digital security and compliance for the academy, entered Fern's office at 8:30 with a tablet and the expression of someone who had not slept cleanly. "There were unauthorized file accesses," Greer said. "Restricted donor records were opened from Tobias' credentials after hours across the past 4 months. The contact information accessed corresponds with a list of high-net-worth individuals who subsequently received private solicitation emails from an outside firm the Academy has no contract with." Aveline looked at her steadily. "Someone used those contacts to fundraise outside the Academy." "To fundraise for a private venture Tobias has been building in parallel," Greer said. "A competing program. He has been using Academy resources, donor relationships, curriculum frameworks, the credentialing partnerships we spent years establishing as the foundation for something that would benefit him personally and independently of this institution." The room went still. Weston, who had been listening from the corner, said it plainly. "That is not a marital dispute. That is institutional theft." The hardest part came 3 days later when Aveline was alone in the Academy's archive room. The same room where she had spent countless evenings as a child, and the door opened to reveal Pax Dunmore, the 27-year-old junior composer in residence, holding a portfolio case against his chest like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Greer had found his name in an internal email chain. She had passed it to Aveline without comment, only a note that said, "Talk to him before anyone else does." Pax was slight and deliberate, with the kind of careful posture that comes from spending years in rooms where you are the least powerful person present. He sat across from Aveline and opened the portfolio without being asked, as though carrying it for this long had made him too tired to delay. "I submitted a composition cycle to the Dean's Emerging Works program 18 months ago," he said. "He told me it wasn't ready. He said the structure needed mentorship, and he offered to work with me privately." He paused. "I was grateful. I thought he believed in my work." The portfolio held original notation sheets with timestamps, emails from Tobias calling the work raw but promising, records of private development sessions, and then, several months later, a printed program from a prestigious invitational concert series in Boston. A concert Tobias had curated as a showcase of the Academy's creative leadership. The centerpiece composition was listed under Tobias's name as creative consultant and co-developer. Pax's name appeared in the program as a research assistant. Aveline looked at the notation sheets, then at the program. The bones were the same. "I tried to report it," Pax said. "An administrative coordinator told me artistic collaboration was common, and that credit attributions were often fluid in development contexts. He pressed his lips together. I stopped trying after that. Aveline placed her hand on the portfolio, not taking it, only acknowledging it. My mother believed, she said quietly, that when someone in a position of power takes another person's work, they are not only stealing credit, they are erasing the proof that person existed. She looked at Pax directly. We are going to correct this. Pax's face held something careful and difficult and almost broken. Then he nodded once. The annual trustees' gala was 3 weeks away when Aveline signed the first authorization form. It was a Thursday evening in Weston's office, the city lights outside the window, the room holding the kind of silence that precedes a change in weather. The form authorized formal legal review of the dean's use of academy resources. The second form froze Tobias's access to restricted donor records pending investigation. The third authorized Greer to preserve all digital records, access logs, and financial trails connected to both Tobias and Dana under institutional hold. Loa sat near the window, watching. When the last form was signed, she said, "You could cancel the gala. Protect yourself from whatever he does when he realizes the walls are moving." Aveline set down the pen. "If I cancel, he calls it a grief-stricken daughter making erratic decisions. He calls it a bitter wife disrupting the institution out of personal spite." She looked at the signed stack. The gala gathers everyone he misled, the board, the major donors, the faculty whose trust he borrowed for 6 years, the students whose work he used to build his credibility. She paused. Let him walk in believing he still owns the room. Weston nodded slowly from across the desk. Somewhere in the city that evening, Tobias was preparing remarks. He had listed himself on the program as the evening's primary speaker. He had not thought to ask who had approved the program. The night of the gala, the Academy's main hall looked the way it always looked when Aveline's family had dressed it for an occasion. Warm light, dark wood, the smell of old paper and good candles. The portraits of her grandparents flanked the main entrance. Her father's portrait hung at the far end of the room above the fireplace, the way it had for 11 years. Tobias arrived in a dark suit with Dana beside him. The photographers near the entrance caught the image, the dean and his companion dressed as though for an ascent. Dana's gown had been chosen carefully. She smiled the way someone smiles when they have rehearsed it enough times that it no longer feels like effort. Landry Crowe, 59-year-old board member and longtime advocate for restructuring the Academy's governance away from family trust control, shook Tobias's hand near the bar. Landry had spent 2 years encouraging Tobias's ambition, cultivating him as a figure around whom an institutional power shift might be justified. He smiled warmly at Dana. He did not look for Aveline. Aveline did not arrive through the main entrance. She came in through the side corridor, the one that connected the administrative wing to the hall, the corridor her father had walked every morning for 30 years. She wore a plain dark dress, her mother's earrings, and her father's watch at her wrist. Weston walked beside her. Fern followed with a tablet. Greer moved quietly behind. Loa stayed close, watching Aveline's face for any sign the room was becoming too heavy. No photographer turned. No one reached to greet her. The woman who controlled the building had arrived without anyone expecting her to matter. The formal program began at 8. Tobias was introduced as the evening's keynote. He walked to the podium to genuine applause, applause built on 6 years of visible work, of programs and speeches and the kind of public-facing effort that produces goodwill before anyone examines what lies underneath. "This institution stands at an inflection point," he began. "The next decade will require bold leadership, people willing to break with comfortable traditions in order to reach something greater." He paused, "And I believe this academy is ready to step into that future." In the front row, Dana held her program and smiled. Near the back of the room, Pax Dunmore sat beside Loa, his portfolio on the chair beside him, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Along the side wall, in the shadow between 2 candelabras, Aveline stood without moving. When Tobias stepped back from the podium and the lights dimmed for the annual presentation reel, the room settled into the expectant quiet of an audience waiting to be shown something they already believed in. The screen descended, 3 seconds of black. Then the Moss Renfield Education Trust's formal institutional seal appeared at the center, not a promotional logo, not the Academy's gala branding, the seal that appeared on legal documents. Tobias's expression went still. The first record filled the screen, a financial entry from the Dean's discretionary fund. Hotel accommodations 4 nights, listed under faculty recruitment. Guest Steve each, charged to the Academy. A sound moved through the room, not quite a gasp. The sound people make when a door opens and the light is wrong. The next document, Payments from the Academy's development sub-account to Veach Creative Solutions. Category: Donor Engagement Strategy. No deliverables on record. Then, access logs. Tobias's institutional credentials opening restricted donor contact across 4 months, dates and times. Specific records. And beside them, a comparison. Those same donor contacts appearing on the solicitation list of a private outside venture operating under Tobias's name. Landry Crowe set down his glass. The screen shifted to a new heading: Original Work, Attribution Review. Pax's notation sheets appeared, time-stamped 2 years earlier. Beside them, the Boston Concert Program. Tobias's name above the composition Pax had written. Then the emails, the mentorship sessions that had slowly become something else. The final program that had erased a young composer and replaced him with a footnote. Tobias stepped away from the podium. Someone needs to stop this. This is a personal matter being weaponized against. No one moved to the projection booth. The screen answered with plain text. This presentation has been authorized by the Moss Renfield Education Trust, the Renfield Academy Board Ethics Committee, and Controlling Ownership Authority. All records are preserved under institutional legal hold. Below that, formal action initiated. Tobias Renfield. Executive suspension pending investigation into misuse of institutional funds, unauthorized access to restricted donor data, and intellectual property dispute. Dana Veach. Suspension pending review of payment irregularities. Landry Crowe. Notification of board ethics review regarding governance conduct. The hall did not erupt. It went quiet, the way rooms go quiet when people understand they are not watching theater. Tobias scanned the room. He found Fern. He found Greer standing near the side door with 2 institutional legal officers on either side of it, calm and unhurried. He found Weston, and then he found Aveline, stepping out of the shadow along the wall. She walked down the side of the room with quiet, steady steps. No one was asked to move. The crowd shifted on its own. She stopped beside Pax Dunmore. That single choice, standing beside the young composer instead of across from her husband, told everyone in the room what this evening was and what it was not. Aveline looked at the assembled board, donors, faculty, and staff. "My grandparents purchased this property 63 years ago," she said. Her voice was level and clear. "My mother wrote its first educational philosophy. My father spent 30 years making it an institution that gave space to artists who had no other advocates." She paused. This academy was not built to serve the ambitions of its administrators. It was built to protect the work of the people inside its walls. She looked at Tobias. Effective immediately, the Trust is initiating formal review of all actions described in this record. Interim leadership will be confirmed by the Ethics Committee within 72 hours. Outside counsel will contact you with the specific terms of what comes next. Tobias stared at her. The confidence he had worn for 6 years, perhaps longer, had gone somewhere he could not immediately locate. "You own this," he said. Not a question. The hollow recognition of a man who has walked through a door 10,000 times and never once looked up to read the name above it. Aveline looked at him. "I protected it," she said. "There is a difference. You never cared enough to know which one I was doing." Dana took a quiet step backward. It was the most honest thing she had done all evening. Weston crossed the room and placed a sealed envelope in Tobias's hand. The formal institutional suspension notice, prepared by outside counsel. A second went to Dana. A third to Landry Crowe, who received it with the expression of a man who had been playing one game and just discovered the other player had been playing something else entirely. Tobias looked at Aveline one more time. His voice had dropped to something almost private. "We could have talked about this." She thought about the lecture hall, the podium, the portrait, the sound of footsteps leaving. "You chose the day, Tobias," she said quietly. "I only chose what came after." She turned to Pax. She looked at him directly, and she spoke so the whole room could hear. "The Academy will halt all further distribution of the Boston Concert Program and will initiate a full attribution review. Pax Dunmore is recognized as the originating composer of the work in question. The institution will make that right." Pax pressed one hand over his mouth. He did not speak, but he nodded, and that nod carried 7 years of silence that had finally been given somewhere to go. The applause started at the back of the room and moved forward. Faculty first, then staff, then donors who had spent years trusting an institution they were only now fully seeing. It was not triumphant. It was the sound of people who had suspected something for a long time and had just been given permission to name it. In the weeks that followed, the corrections were made. Tobias's suspension became a permanent separation. The outside venture he had been building collapsed without the Academy contacts that had been quietly feeding it. Dana's contracts were terminated. Landry Crowe resigned from the board before the ethics committee convened. The Boston program was recalled and reissued under Pax Dunmore's name, with a formal institutional statement of recognition attached. Pax sat across from Evelyn at a board table 3 weeks later with a revised contract in front of him. His hands still shook slightly as he signed, but this time no one was taking anything from him. Evelyn stopped using the side corridor. The first morning she walked through the main entrance, past her grandparents' portraits, past the students moving through the lobby with instrument cases and rolled canvases and the quiet, irreplaceable business of making things. The staff on the morning shift looked up. No one announced her, no one made a speech. People simply knew, the way people know when someone who has always belonged somewhere finally stops pretending they don't. She paused in the lobby and looked up at the oldest beam in the building, the original timber from 1961 that her grandfather had insisted on keeping when the walls were rebuilt around it. It was still there. It had always been there. Some structures outlast everyone who ever tried to replace them. Some women do too.